Hello brave listeners, put on your headphones and close your eyes. Let's dive into the world of terror.
Kenapa tak tidur lagi, ha?
Once upon a time, there was a young couple, Jane and Michael, who decided to spend their honeymoon in a remote cabin in the woods. The cabin was nestled in a clearing surrounded by tall trees, far away from civilization. It was the perfect getaway for the newlyweds. The first night, they settled in and went to bed early. As they lay in bed, they heard a faint scratching sound outside the window. Michael dismissed it as a tree branch, but Jane couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next day, they went on a hike through the woods. As they walked deeper into the forest, they stumbled upon an abandoned cabin. It was old and dilapidated, with broken windows and a rotting front porch. Despite the eerie atmosphere, Michael convinced Jane to explore it. Inside, they found an old journal belonging to the previous owner. The journal detailed how the owner had been tormented by a malevolent spirit that haunted the cabin. The spirit would scratch at the windows and doors at night, and it was rumored to be the vengeful ghost of a young girl who had died in the woods. Jane and Michael dismissed the journal as fiction and went back to their own cabin. That night, the scratching sound returned, louder than before. They peered out the window and saw a figure in a white dress standing in the woods. The figure had no face, but they could sense its malevolence. As the nights went on, the scratching became more frequent, and the figure in the woods came closer to the cabin each time. Jane and Michael tried to leave, but the woods seemed to have trapped them. They were unable to find their way back to civilization. One night, the figure in the white dress appeared in the cabin, standing at the foot of their bed. Jane and Michael were paralyzed with fear as the figure crawled onto the bed, inching closer and closer to them. They could feel its cold breath on their faces as it reached out to touch them. Just when they thought it was over, the figure vanished into thin air, leaving Jane and Michael alone in the dark. They never spoke of the incident again, but they both knew they would never forget the terror they had experienced in that remote cabin in the woods. It was a dark and stormy night as John was driving home from his late-night shift at work. The rain was coming down hard, and the wind was howling like a pack of wolves in the distance. John was tired and just wanted to get home to his wife and kids, but he had a sinking feeling that something was wrong. As he drove down the dark, deserted road, he noticed a figure standing on the side of the road. The figure was dressed in all black, with their face hidden in the shadows. John slowed down to see if they needed help, but as he approached, the figure disappeared into the darkness. Feeling uneasy, John continued driving, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Suddenly, his car stalled, and he found himself stranded in the middle of nowhere. He tried starting the car again, but it wouldn't budge. As John stepped out of the car to inspect the engine, he heard a faint whisper in the wind. It sounded like a child's voice, but he couldn't make out what it was saying. He dismissed it as his imagination, but the feeling of being watched persisted. Suddenly, John heard footsteps approaching him from behind. He turned around to see the figure he had seen earlier standing there, their face still obscured in darkness. The figure spoke, and to John's horror, it was the child's voice he had heard earlier. "Hello, John," the figure said. "You should have kept driving." John was frozen in fear as the figure stepped closer to him. As it approached, John realized that it was not a child but an adult with a twisted, contorted face. The figure lunged at John, and he ran back to his car, desperately trying to start it. Finally, the car roared to life, and John sped away, leaving the figure behind. But the horror didn't end there. As he drove down the road, he saw more figures emerging from the darkness, each with twisted faces and maniacal laughter. John realized that he had stumbled upon an ancient burial ground, and he had awoken the spirits of the dead. They were seeking revenge on the living, and he was their next victim. John never made it home that night. His car was found abandoned on the side of the road, and he was never seen again. But the locals say that if you drive down that road at midnight, you can still hear his screams echoing through the darkness, a warning to others not to disturb the dead.